All right, this is a quick overview of how to create a partition. Sorry. So let's look at CFDisk first. CFDisk will show us, first of all, what partitioning scheme we're using. We're using GPT, and we have to make sure we have free space. If we're not using GPT or we're not using free space, or we don't have any free space, then you have issues and you need to figure out how to solve it. But I'm not going to do that right now. So first thing we're going to do is come down here and we're going to say, arrow down to free space. We're going to say new, specify the size. Now you're going to have to double check on your assignment exactly what size you need, but I'm going to create a 1,000 megabyte partition, which is 1 gig. And then I can create another one if I want. So I'm going to say new, let's do 200 meg. So I've got two new partitions. You can see SDA4, SDA5. That sounds good to me. I'm going to write those changes to the partition table and say yes. And then Q to get out. So before I do anything else, I either A, have to reboot, or B, run the sudo part probe command so that the kernel is aware of the changes that I made. So I'm going to do that, and then I always like to do sudo fdisk -L, so it'll list the partitions, and if it sees number 4 and 5, the new ones I created, then the kernel is in fact aware of those new partitions that I made. Okay, easy enough to make a partition. Now I have to decide how I want to format it. Well, I'm going to assume that I'm going to format the SDA4 kfs.ext4 I'm going to format SDA4 as an ext4 file system. So I'm going to hit enter to do that. I'm going to do SDA5 as maybe a, NTFS. Okay, so it sets up the file system. On the first one, it created a bunch of inodes. You can see here, it created inodes. We've already talked about that. On the second one, it's creating an NTFS volume, which takes a little bit longer, and that's mainly for Windows. And I don't think we're doing that in our class, but it's just an example. Okay, finished. Okay, so now we've formatted the partitions. Next thing to do is make a mount point for those. So I'm going to do sudo mkdir. I'm going to make this mount point at, maybe I'll make one at Windows and make another one at Linux. I don't know. So we make a note where those are at. Always pay attention. Do you have a slash, or using absolute path, or using a relative? So I've made my mount points. That's the mkdir command. Now I'm going to mount those. Sudo mount dev SDA, what was it, 4 to, let's see, that was the Linux one, I believe. And sudo mount dev SDA5 was my NTFS one. Go to Windows, whatever. Now I can do the df command, and I can see that they're both mounted, or do the mount command, a lot of crap there. SDA4, SDA5 shows that they're both mounted. Okay, did one other test. I'm going to go into those directories, and I'm going to see if I can create something. Touch x.txt. Probably not going to let me because I haven't even set up the ownership for that. So great, I can sudo it. I'm going to go to Windows, sudo touch y.txt. We can also do a df dot. We can see that this directory is in fact using dev SDA5. And if I go back into my Linux, do a df dot, we can see that this directory is in fact on my other partition, dev SDA4. Problem is, right now, if I reboot my file system, I'm going to lose all those. So the last thing I would want to do is put those entries in etcfstab. Okay, etcfstab. And oops, we're going to say dev SDA4 is mounted at /Linux. It's an ext4 file system. We're going to mount it with the defaults 0, 0. We're going to do the same thing with 5. And this is NTFS default 0, 0. And hopefully I have that in right. Up above, I can look at that. They're using UUIDs. I'm not going to use that. There's my mount point. There's the type. There's the options, and then you have 0, 0 at the end. I think that's good. So to test it, I'm going to do sudo umount -a, which will unmount all file systems that aren't currently being used. df, I can show SDA4, SDA5 are not there. I'm going to do sudo mount -a to make sure they show back up. And they do. If they do not show back up, you have an error in etc stab, and if you have an error and you reboot, you'll hose your file system and won't be able to get back into it. So there's a quick overview of partitioning.